You've been getting lots of wonderful information throughout this conference, and we're going to cap it off with some updates and information about really best business practices when you as therapy professionals are incorporating equine movement as one of the tools in your toolbox. And then just give you a little brief bit of insight into where our status of reimbursement is with regard to utilizing this treatment tool. Just have the standard disclosures. I'm not getting paid or getting any great concessions for sharing this information with you. And honestly, I'm really representing the Ethics, Advocacy, and Reimbursement Committee of the American Hippotherapy Association in this presentation. In terms of learning objectives, I want you to be able to identify at the end of this talk some key business components that will help you to be more successful in your therapy practice. That includes equine movement as a specialty treatment tool. I want you to be able to identify 3 common marketing errors that can truly jeopardize your practice, and be able to identify 3 recommended practices for avoiding reimbursement issues and chargebacks and denials. I know you've all heard this over and over and over again, but it does bear repeating one more time. We don't define hippotherapy, we describe it, and it's the term that describes how we as therapy professionals are using evidence-based practice and our clinical reasoning to purposefully manipulate equine movement as a tool to promote function in our patients, to engage the systems that support functional skills. And best practice dictates that we therapy professionals integrate it with our other tools. We are not doing hippotherapy. And I like the bottom statement because I think you can really reduce it down to this simple statement. Equine movement as a therapy tool can be used to facilitate the neuromotor systems that support functional skills in our patients. Okay? Now, that being said, this is even more important. This is what it is not. It is not a separate therapy service, ever. It is not a separate therapy program. It is not a modality. It is not a specific therapy strategy. We are not all going to use it in a prescribed manner in the same way across the disciplines or even within the disciplines, because we treat a broad variety of patients with different needs. And it is not a specific therapy procedure. And so all of those red highlighted terms need to be stricken from your vocabulary when you talk about equine movement. It's a tool. The horse isn't the tool. The movement that the horse provides is the tool that you are using. This is terribly important from a business standpoint because it's not even so much always about what you do in the treatment session. It's about what you say you do to the public. And the public is pretty broad. It's not just our clients and their families, okay? First and foremost, follow your practice act. This is a tool that you integrate in, but you're responsible for following your licensure and your practice act and doing what you would do as a PT or an OT or an SLP professional in any other setting. Just because you're in the barn, you don't throw out that paradigm, okay? You need to understand those aspects of business that are particularly related to incorporating this tool, because it is not. It does bring some additional issues and considerations to your therapy practice. You need to be proactive. You need to anticipate the challenges that you might face as you start down this road. It's not always, I've always said, number one, private practice in general is not for the faint-hearted. It's not, okay? And then if you add this specialty tool that is very misunderstood by the general public, you have to be strong and anticipating what might be lying ahead down the road. And always, always, always try to follow those best practices that we at the American Hippotherapy Association have worked very hard to put together to guide you, to make your journey a little easier. Now, the point of this talk is not to tell you how to set up your practice, okay? We have an hour. That's not nearly enough time. However, you do need to have some business basics in mind, and that's what I'm going to spend some time on right now. The first business basic is have a business structure. And it doesn't really matter which of these you elect to follow, whether you're a sole proprietor or a nonprofit corporation or an LLC, you need to have a business structure in place to represent you and think of this as a business. You are a therapy practice. This is a very basic business concept. If I decide to go out to the local horse facility and offer my services as a speech language pathologist and start treating patients, I have just stepped into a private practice arena, so to speak. I am doing a therapy practice. I am not a program, I am not a center, I am a therapy professional providing treatment, okay? So you need to identify yourself as a therapy practice in name and in marketing. Now, that means that you really do need to have a tax identification number to represent your practice, even as an individual. And more you see across the scope of therapy settings. Early intervention is a great example. There, you don't see a lot of contracted providers. You see either employees of agencies or you see sole proprietors contracting their services to agencies. So you're most protected if you have a tax identification number, because when you do that, you're also going to have a NAICS number, an NAICS number that reflects what industry you are part of. And quite honestly, you self-identify what industry you're part of. But for you all in therapy practice, that happens to incorporate equine movement as a treatment tool, your primary NAICS number should be offices of physical, occupational, and speech therapists and audiologists. That's the industry that you are actually working in when you include horses in your treatment. So what is the NAICS code? Well, it's a classification system that basically you self-identify, but it identifies the primary industry you're associated with, and it allows, there's a lot of different ways that it can be used in the business community. And when you're a business with a single focus, like Skyline Therapy Services is an outpatient pediatric clinic, it has a very targeted focus. And so I have one NAICS number. I'm in offices of a speech pathologist, physical therapist, OTs, or audiologists. Businesses, whether profit or nonprofit, that offer a variety of different programs can actually have more than one NAICS number. So an adaptive riding facility whose primary focus might be their adaptive riding services, who then decides to generate a new service and have some therapy services available to clientele, now has a second program under their initial business structure, okay? And they can actually identify a secondary NAICS number or even a tertiary NAICS number. If so, maybe you do adaptive riding and you do boarding and there's a treatment program and you end up with a lot of different designations. Where this is important is that in healthcare, those numbers, that code, it can be used by the malpractice and liability insurance companies and the workers' comp companies that set our rates and assign risk and establish our premiums. Health insurance companies, the reimbursement side of this, use the NAICS number to actually identify the nature of the business or the service that you are affiliated with. And they look at those industry codes and to some degree use that to help decide what's covered and what's not covered. And then certainly it identifies your industry category to the Internal Revenue Service. And then there's other various government agencies and trade associations and different entities that can use that classification system for their own internal thing, to track business trends, to look at national standards and so on and so forth. So what I wanted to do is take a little bit of a problematic scenario here, but one that has actually come to us at the EA&R committee, and give you an idea of how this can play out. Just that one little code, that NACS code. So we have an accredited PATH center that is well known for its adaptive riding services, and it's incorporated as such, okay? And they're now going to offer therapy services, and they would actually like to bill insurance. They would like to create that revenue stream where they're a network provider for some insurance companies to pay for the therapy services that they are providing. So their NACS code actually identifies them as a horseback riding facility. And just as a little bit of trivia, I put this to the test after this all came to us. And if you put in adaptive riding or therapeutic riding, whichever you want, into the NACS classification system, this is what comes up. Other amusement and recreational activities, i.e. horseback riding, okay? I also, just as a by the way, put in hippotherapy and nothing comes up. That's actually good. That's a good thing. That's one place we don't have confusion. So their NACS number identifies them as a horseback riding facility, and immediately the health insurance companies that they were trying to become network providers for said, sorry, we don't contract with horseback riding programs. Okay? It was irrelevant that they had licensed therapy professionals legitimately doing PT and OT and speech therapy. It was a non-go for that insurance company, because typically we don't work in recreational activity or in recreational facilities, and it red flagged that health insurance company, and they just weren't going there. So not having the right NACS code designation affiliated with your tax identification number can create a problem for you, okay? It's just a red flag there. But in addition, your workers' compensation rating might actually be higher because you're being rated as an equestrian facility instead of a therapy practice. And in the equestrian world, workers' comp rates are astronomical for most horse people because they get rated with the risk associated with racetracks. So you want to have the right NACS number. So what's the solution? What should this facility do? Well, the first thing what we would recommend is they really just need to establish a second business identity for themselves. They could have a side-by-side. They could have their PATH designation, and they could have their therapy services designation with separate tax ID numbers, separate NACS numbers, separate systems. And their marketing and scheduling and their documentation should all be separate as well. So there's no inadvertent commingling of the adaptive riding services and the therapy services. And being sure that it's all very clear and laid out. They wouldn't have to do that. They could also maintain their industry identity with their primary NACS number, and they could establish a secondary NACS code, which would be the offices of speech pathology and physical therapy and occupational therapy and audiologists. Their marketing, though, would have to be very, very clear in still keeping it all separate, because it is possible then that the stakeholders that are looking at those industry codes still might latch on to that primary code, and the confusion might continue, okay? So that's just something to be aware of, and something that has come to us in recent months. Another business basic: market correctly. Adhere to our terminology guidelines. And your marketing materials should leave no doubt that yours is a standard therapy practice. That includes your advertising, your websites, your brochures, your front-end interview with prospective patients and their families, any media you do, any fundraising that you do. It needs to be correct. So I'm going to throw myself under the bus here, okay? I actually incorporated on September 21st, 1982, as Therapeutic Horsemanship of New Mexico. There was no, hippotherapy wasn't even a term in the United States at that point, and there was no American Hippotherapy Association. And I was so excited, based on research I had done as a grad student, about the value of this equine movement with my speech and language patients and with the PTs and OTs that worked for me and their patients. And and I had a lot of problem, because what was I doing? The question is, what was I doing? Horse therapy? Was I doing adaptive riding? What are hippotherapy services? Well, we weren't even calling it hippotherapy at that point. And this is predating managed healthcare, okay? So I would file to insurance companies and I would get denied categorically because my name said it all. I was a horseback riding facility, okay? So I finally got a little smart after I got tired of fighting denials and became THNM Inc. doing business as Skyline Therapy Services. And I want you to know that it was a 180 the other direction in terms of what the public perceived. And there still were horses, but from the very beginning, we weren't just using horses because that's not good practice as a therapist, right? We were using lots of different tools and activities. And it clearly established in my name that I was doing therapy for people, okay? Now, we all love our horses, and there's a predominance of horsey names out there. And you just need to consider for a moment what the messaging is to the public. So, along those same lines, when you're marketing, your photos and your verbiage should be representative of your scope as a therapy professional. You don't just have pictures of kids on horses or adults on horses. You have a good blend that represents your skill set as a therapy professional. It will save you a lot of pain, I promise. You also, sadly, need to consider how every word in your marketing can be misinterpreted. Because we write things, and AHA has had this problem. We're constantly having to rethink the way we talk about things because we know what we intend, but the public at large misinterprets very, very easily. And you really don't want to create the impression that horses are doing the therapy. Actually, if horses are doing the therapy, we're all out of jobs because we won't be needed at all. Therapy services need to be marketed as that use the horse as being part of the range of the tools that we're using, and therapy services that are part of the range of services in an equestrian facility must really be teased out and separated and treated with care so that you're leading with your therapy service and not with your therapy tool. So, advertising hippotherapy programs and services, don't go there. You are certainly not trying to say you're a hippotherapist, but that's what the public's going to think. You're a hippotherapist, and it separates hippotherapy, which we know is a tool, from PTOT and speech. Not a good idea. And it puts you at risk, both ethically and legally, because if you're doing a hippotherapy, if hippotherapy is a service, where's the licensure? Where's the training? Where are the standards? We don't want it to be viewed as an additional service. As well, advertising equine assisted therapy or equine therapy does the same thing. That's a huge marketing error, and we have taken strong stance on that in our terminology document. Horses don't provide therapy services, we do. Commingling therapeutic riding programming with therapy services becomes the problem because we know what we can say, but the general public, it gets pretty messy. And so people start talking about the equine therapy at this facility and nobody knows what is actually recreational, what is actually treatment. We need to take responsibility for keeping it very, very clean. And there actually was an instance a few years ago where therapists were claiming to do OT and PT. They weren't billing insurance. They had funding that paid for the services for their clientele. And they really weren't doing therapy that was representative of a plan of care like we should be doing. And so they were kind of like saying they were doing PT and OT, but they were really kind of doing a therapeutic riding session. And it actually ended up that they weren't doing standard therapy evals. They got so sloppy, they weren't doing therapy evals. They weren't really working within their Practice Act, and it resulted in major sanctions for them in terms of their licensure. So it's important. Now, what's really tricky is actually, before I go into the scenario, is that if you're working as an employee in a facility that has multiple programs, and it's easy to think, oh, they're responsible for the marketing. But remember, always, it's your license that's on the line. It's your license that allows them to charge therapy service rates. It's your license that allows them to say they are doing or providing a therapy service. So it would behoove you to sit down with your marketing directors and your administrators and say, look, it has to be said this way or I'm out. So here is another problem scenario where a facility offers a range of services, including able-bodied instruction, adaptive riding, and treatment. And their website actually advertises equine-assisted services, which include horsemanship instruction, therapeutic adaptive riding, and hippotherapy program, which is in fact provided by AHCB certified therapists. And right there, we have that same problem again, where we have created a separate non-existent therapy service. So you get that, again, that distinction of hippotherapy being separate from our therapy practices. And the descriptor equine-assisted services does continue to promote that erroneous message that the horse is actually the primary entity in any treatment, okay? It's not the case. It's one of the many tools we use. It may be the predominant tool with 90% of your clientele. That's great. But you cannot get trapped into leading with the tool and not with the therapy practice. All right, so here's a third one where we have another kind of little marketing issue, which is all going to set you up for reimbursement problems. There's a point to this. So we have an OT and an SLP who are partners in a private practice, and they recently added equine movement as a specialty tool. And so they're very excited to share all this information with the public and market. And so their services now on their website say, we offer hippotherapy, which is to the point, but again, that term creates a misinformation piece that hippotherapy is somehow separate from the other therapy services that they provide, okay? And it also portrays that this practice is only using horses in therapy. Well, I will tell you that there are a lot of health insurance carriers who have people who routinely cruise the websites and the marketing materials of therapy practices to see what they're doing. And this one is going to get red flagged because they can say they're doing OT and PT and speech or whatever, but it really looks like they're just doing hippotherapy. And so you just create a lot of problems for yourself. So the solutions in both of those previous scenarios is to adhere to the terminology document and use the marketing materials and guidelines that the AHA has put together to guide you, and be very balanced in the representation of what you do. It's fine to market your specialty tool. That's awesome. But do it in a correct fashion so that it's identified as a specialty tool and not as a separate service. We offer OT, PT, and speech and language therapy services. We specialize in using equine movement as a treatment tool. And we as therapy professionals have a lot of other specialties. As an SLP, I might be prompt trained. I might have a specialty in feeding. There's a lot in augmentative communication. We have a lot of different specialties, either tools or skill sets that we advertise, but we don't inadvertently create 6 different little therapies out of them, okay? We keep them embedded in our actual core clinical licensure. So, another business basic to carry away is you, as the licensed therapy professional, have responsibility. Certainly if you're the therapy practice owner, the buck stops with you, okay? You're legally and ethically responsible for how those services are being marketed and how they're being provided and the documentation and how you're billing and how you're getting paid. And that comes with being in business. And that's why I say it's not for the faint-hearted, because it can be kind of a minefield in a lot of ways, okay? But conversely, if you're the therapy professional that is working in a practice, you also have a responsibility to make sure that that practice owner or that business owner is representing what you do legally and ethically in the marketing and in the billing and in the reimbursement piece. And you have a responsibility to make sure that your documentation, your clinical documentation, is auditable. Auditable at all times. It doesn't matter whether you get paid by health insurance, whether it's private pay, or whether you give it away. You are still providing a treatment, a medical treatment, and you are legally and ethically bound by your Practice Act and your licensure. So you need to be auditable at all times. And what happens is that people get sloppy. Somehow we get sloppy in the barn. So here we have a scenario where a PT is working in a larger equine facility that, among other things, has set up a therapy practice. And this PT only does about 15 hours a week providing therapy. And they're not billing insurance. It's funded through other alternative sources. And the therapist's sessions are all scheduled for 30 minutes because that's what the writing sessions are scheduled for. She's just tried to kind of overlay on what the adaptive writing program is doing. So basically it turns out where client comes in, client gets on the horse, client's on the horse, gets off and goes home because 30 minutes isn't really very long. And there's not really any other treatment happening off the horse, like working on the functional skills that should be in the plan of care and the goals and the objectives. And so families are paying out of pocket, but they're actually submitting claims to their insurance companies with the super bill that this therapist provides. All right, well, first and foremost, this facility and the therapist are going to be at risk for a chargeback from these families' health insurance plans because these therapy sessions are focused completely on the horse. It looks like a horseback riding lesson to the insurance person. And there's not any time for really providing a comprehensive plan of care because they're just doing stuff on the horse. And they're not, unless they're all trying to, habilitate or rehabilitate horsemen, they're not working on functional skills within activities of daily living. And the facility's name just happens to be very horsey in nature and not therapy in nature. And so the irony of this is that the family will not be the one that the health company goes back to. They will go back to the treating therapist. They will go back to that equestrian facility because the services rendered fall outside of the standard scope of practice, the way it's being represented by just doing 30 minutes on the horse, okay? So, what's the solution? Well, first and foremost, this is another example of where that facility needs to set up a separate business entity to represent the therapy practice. A separate tax ID, separate name, so on and so forth. But the physical therapist is equally responsible for going in and designing therapy, not just overlaying on a convenient adaptive writing schedule. And they have to if you're going to do therapy in a facility that provides other equestrian services, that facility has to buy in and allow you to develop a therapy practice. They have to be willing to allocate their assets in a new way to make sure that it's mainstream therapy, which happens to have this really cool specialty tool, okay? And so she needs to redesign, or he or she needs to redesign the sessions to be consistent with the therapy culture in their area. And honestly, I don't know a lot of places where just 30-minute sessions happen. If they do, and that's the standard in your area, and every clinic down the road only offers 30-minute therapy, that might work. But in most cases, we're doing 45 to 50-minute, 60-minute therapy sessions in most other settings. And so you need to be sensitive of the therapy culture in your area and be consistent with it, okay? And there should be a variety of tools and activities being incorporated. Even if you're just using the things that are available to you in the equine environment, you're still needing to work on functional skills. And then all the standard documentation needs to be in place. The referral, a formal evaluation, the treatment notes that reflect that you're working on goals and you're making progress. All of those pieces need to be there because you might get by for years, but when that insurance company goes, I don't know if this was really medically necessary, I don't know if this was really appropriate, and they come back to look at your documentation, and in this case, that physical therapist has not got notes that reflect a treatment progression, there's going to be a lot of heartache, okay? So it's funny because I have said this so many times to so many people in so many different ways, and yet week after week, month after month, we on the EAR committee we get word from our members, look at this website, look at the way this is being done. I mean, people aren't really getting it, so I'm here to tell you, you need to get it because you're putting not only yourself at risk, but you're putting everybody at risk. You're setting us back instead of moving us forward. And as much as I enjoy doing, using equine movement as a treatment tool, and I've done it for 42 years, the idea that I could get burned down, so to speak, by a health company coming back and trying to charge back everything I do, that would be horrible, absolutely horrible. So you don't want to put yourself in that position. All right, so let's move to a little bit different area. A business basic, you gotta know your break-even point. You gotta know what it costs you to do this and how much you need to generate financially to be solvent. And it's a kind of a hard thing to do depending on where you're at. But I'm gonna try to keep it simple. Basically, it translates to how many therapy sessions are needed to offset your fixed expenses, the expenses that keep you open, and to account for the variable expenses. And honestly, business fact, most businesses in most industries, including therapy, start out in the red for a while until they can sufficiently establish a solid, reliable revenue stream in order to, maintain their solvency, okay? There's tons of information out there to guide you in setting up a business. But just to kind of give you some, I thought it might be fun to give you a little bit of a real life example. So how are you going to, this is the simplest method, how to determine your break even. So how many hours of treatment can you actually do in a month? What's available? And then you're going to divide your monthly expenses by the number of treatments you provide, and that gives you your hourly break even point. It's not always completely reliable because if you have a lot of variable expenses, that can fluctuate. But let's just take ABC Therapy Clinic. Notice no horses in the name, but they do specialize in using equine movement as a tool. And their monthly expenses, because they have to have a horse handler and they have to pay grain and hay and stuff, their monthly fixed expenses are about $10,000 a month. So in this scenario, we have a single practitioner. This is one therapist wanting to do this kind of as a sole proprietor, private practice. So she's decided that he or she can provide 40 hours of therapy a week, okay? And if she's got a $10,000 a month expense, she is going to cost $62.50 an hour to break even. Now, this person's not established with any insurance companies yet, just trying to get out there and get started. And so this person has established their reimbursement at $90 an hour, cash pay. And so the income that's being generated is $14,400 a month. Now, in that $10,000, that's not her wages. That's just the fixed wages of being in business, okay? So she's netting $27.50 an hour if she collects for all the therapy sessions that she actually billed, which in a cash situation, it's pretty good to get the cash get it at the door. So she's generating about $4,400 a month, which, might not really feel like enough, but at least she's not in the red. Okay, so now where does this person go? Sorry, I'm doing this in the feminine because all you guys out there, it applies to you too. So what would happen if this therapist increased the hourly rate to $110 an hour? This might be one way to improve their financial situation. So now the monthly income increases to $17,600, okay, based on that same 40 hours a week schedule. But the expenses have stayed pretty much the same because it's still one therapist, she's got one paid handler, and if she has some volunteer help, that's great, but that's kind of where she's at. Her net has increased now to $47.50 per therapy hour, or $7,600 a month for her. That looks a lot better, doesn't it? Okay. Now, what happened was her price increase gave her $3,200 more a month, but she needs to factor in that there's probably going to be about at least an 8% cancellation rate because that's just reality. So she's got to deal with that. So she wants to maybe take her net and set aside some money as a buffer against cancellations or against some unforeseen expenses. But that still, in this scenario, leaves her $6,200 a month in wages, or roughly $74,400 a year, okay? That's not bad. The national average for most of the therapists and are across disciplines is a very general average, is like going to be the national average is going to be in the $80,000, $75,000 to $85,000 range. So she's not too bad. But another way that she might be able to move forward would be to add another therapy professional. So now she adds another therapy professional, and she adds a horse handler. And now they're doubling the number of hours that they're doing therapy to 80. So but they've gone back to the $90 an hour therapy rate, and they're averaging, bringing in $28,800 a month. So now their break-even point has gone up even a little bit more, and they're able to generate $11,288 per month. And you kind of see where this is going. It's just to kind of give you some tools to kind of manipulate the numbers. Because I think what happens is we jump in and we haven't actually thought about how it's all going to work. So in this scenario, they're now putting about $2,250 away as a buffer, and an additional buffer against other expenses. And they're able, and the practice owner is actually able to make, $82,000 a year. And again, these are just like really rough examples, but it allows you, it's just a way to think about using a break-even point to sort of predictively analyze what you need to do. Our national therapy associations are awesome. They have private practice acts. They have all kinds of resources for you in guiding you in private practice. And all you have to factor in are the added variables, perhaps, of including equine movement as a treatment tool. But I would highly recommend for you to go to your National Therapy Association practice acts for guidance. I already said this, but I'm going to say it again. Be auditable, okay? Follow the documentation and treatment coding guidelines that your practice ascribes to. Use standard therapy language in your clinical documentation, and use the codes that are appropriate under the CPT coding system that identify the services, the procedures that you were using and that you're licensed to use, okay? So within that, you need to establish medical necessity for skilled therapy services. And even if you're private pay, I recommend getting a prescription or a referral from the physician, because I want somebody else to, I have a conflict of interest. I want them to be medically necessary, right? I want their business. So if you have a physician or, making that medical referral or prescribing PTO to your speech, you're kind of helping sort of up the bar on establishing that medical necessity a little bit better. And regardless of payer sources, have all of your appropriate clinical documentation up to date and safely secured, whether it's in paper form or it's electronic. And do not use alternative coding systems, and do not use HCPCS Level 2 code S8940, hippotherapy/equestrian therapy, okay? More on that in a minute. AHA, we communicate with AOTA and APTA and ASHA, and they have clearly conveyed to us that we should be following their standard coding procedures. And it's illegal for an insurance company to tell you what codes you did. We are also worried about doing something wrong that we cave, but you need to stand up for yourself, all right? Because as stated in our billing and coding practice statement, you need to use the CPT codes that best reflect the service that you were providing. This is all available to you on the website. This coding and billing document is there for your use, okay? And it's our responsibility to determine what codes we use. And remember that it's a billing code, but it's a procedure code. It helps identify what you were doing so that anybody knows that you were not a speech, you were doing, I'm doing speech therapy. I'm not pretending to do physical therapy, or, it keeps it clean. And when you use other coding systems, making up your own codes, whatever, you're actually putting yourself at risk, both ethically and legally, all right? So I wanted to give you a really quick update on where we're at with reimbursement as related to equine movement as a treatment tool. So because people are sloppy in their marketing, and because we keep advertising hippotherapy programs and equine assisted therapy, it's slow. It's very slow because there's an awful lot of educating that has to happen. And so when we're out there, we're trying to proactively fix the reimbursement problems, and it feels like we're swimming uphill a lot of the time, because somebody will come to us with a problem, and then we go to their website and we're like, well, of course you're having problems because you're not doing this according to the AHA standards. So some things to consider: practice names that overemphasize horses, that could be problematic. Certainly the hippotherapy program advertising is problematic, as well as equine-assisted therapy. Any impression that the horse is doing the therapy and that you're just an additional appendage. In addition, the clinical documentation has to support the therapy billing codes. So you need, what we see problems in not establishing medical need, in not using therapy first language, in not using language that supports the CPT code, and people not doing standard evaluations and reevaluations, okay? It's what you would be doing in any other setting. Why is this setting different? I don't know why, but somehow we get sloppy. And again, you need to understand why you might get chargebacks. Most insurance companies, chargebacks that we have dealt with as an industry actually have occurred in out-of-network situations. Not when you have a contract with them where they actually understand what you're doing, but where the family's super bill is being sent to them and your documentation is misleading and it leaves you open, okay? So you don't want to do hippotherapy in isolation. That's not the way it's done, okay? Poor clinical documentation has been a big issue for people. A moment on S8940. Most insurance companies do have it listed as an exclusion, and in a way that's appropriate because there is no such thing as hippotherapy/equestrian therapy. That's not really the problem we're facing. The problem we're facing is that people are using the code because, if there's a code out there, it must be vetted, it must be okay. It is not okay. An insurance company it's not legal for them to tell you, you have to use this code and we're gonna deny it, okay? You have to stand up for yourself. We should always be using the CPT codes because the only way we're ever gonna get rid of this code which represents hippotherapy as a service, it's in a section of the codes that's not where we code treatment. It's for medical products and related healthcare services, the ambulance driver, the nutritionist at the hospital. That's where it's actually at in the coding system. Remember, it was generated by Blue Cross Blue Shield years ago to create an automatic denial because they were confusing what we did with therapeutic riding. But we have been trying to get rid of it. We have had conversations with Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. We have had conversations with CMS. We have had conversations with our national therapy associations. And the bottom line is, the only way to really get rid of this code is for nobody to use it because bad codes go away. So the best offense for a bad code is don't use it. Don't let anybody tell you to use it. And you're going to have some interesting situations depending on what state you're in. The biggest place we're seeing the problem is in Medicaid waivers, not straight Medicaid, but Medicaid waivers, and that's a topic for another day. But I will tell you that we are making great inroads with Medicaid. It turns out because Medicaid really drives our pediatric reimbursement, even with the commercial insurance companies, that we need to start there with getting rid of the exclusions. And currently, 37 states do not have any exclusionary policy language related to the use of this tool. And we're working really hard to get rid of those exclusions in the other 13 states. Colorado is our current target. And we're making progress, and we've got a lot of good things happening up here. Okay.
What was the most recent?
The most recent was Montana. We got Montana to, we got Montana to get rid of it. All right, I know, it's very exciting. So, and yes, it's very exciting. And here in Colorado, we have a really tough Medicaid office. They're like, but so we've had to go a legislative route. And as of yesterday morning, we have cleared the second. The first hurdle was getting it through the House committee unanimously to remove the policy language. The second was clearing the Appropriations Committee yesterday to establish that there's not going to be a monetary penalty to the Medicaid program by removing the exclusion. And we're moving forward. So we're pretty excited about that. So to guide your practice, we have our statements. The best practice for when you're using this tool on the website. We have the marketing brochure, guidelines. It's a downloadable PDF. We have a don't put yourself at risk paper with a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. And we have a number of other resources that are available to you as members, and we update it frequently. We have a document on understanding the S8940 code. If you're going to have to fight the battle and say, no, 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 I am not going to use this code, you need to know how to defend it. So we've tried to provide you with as many different resources as possible, because our goal as the Ethics, Advocacy, and Reimbursement Committee is to be there for you as members. But you got to help us on the other side. We can't fix the problems if you keep making the same mistakes over and over. I know I sound like lecturing, but it becomes a little painful sometimes when somebody comes to us really needing help, and then we go and we're like, oh my gosh, you're still, talking about horse therapy on your website and, things like that. So there's also just a need for, if you have confusion or questions, you need to reach out to us, because we really are here for you. So, yeah. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes?
Two questions. So on your website, if you don't currently have an SLP,
Right.
do you still advertise with your practice that provides OT-PT speech?
No.
Or should you literally only have the disciplines that you
Yes.
are working at the time?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, that's actually a very good question, because since I have all three disciplines, everything I do kind of has them all enmeshed in there. No, you're going to advertise what you do. And if you're a sole proprietor occupational therapist, and that's what you do, and you're just offering OT, then that's all you're going to advertise.
You have staff, so I have two PTs. I just don't have speech
Yeah,
therapists now.
right.
If I do next month and then I don't 6 months from now, should I constantly keep the website up to date? Is it misleading if I say we're a practice that provides PTO to speech if we currently don't have a speech therapist on staff? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, that's actually a good question. I mean, I don't know how difficult it is to keep, updating your website. I mean, the cleanest is you should be advertising the services that you actually provide. And I'm sorry if you're having trouble keeping a speech pathologist on staff. That's sad.
And then the second is, what is your take on the barn fee or the uncovered usage fee for Medicaid plans?
Okay, so it's all in how you do it. Cassandra, are you here? She just stepped out. Oh, at a critical time when I needed her. So you're not gonna, I think, again, you have to kind of look at the therapy culture that you're in. So, for example, Cassandra, who just abandoned me, is actually in a therapy culture where, come here, Cassie, where she's in a therapy culture where it's actually the norm for therapy practices to charge for non-covered services or non-covered tools or non-covered, I don't know what your verbiage always is. And so she can actually say, we're going to do physical therapy. Just correct me if I get it wrong. We're going to provide physical therapy to your family member. And if you want this specialty tool, equine movement, it will be an additional $25 per session. But she has to do that, and they can say yes or no, and then move forward from there. But she also would do the same thing if she got one of those new fancy, yeah, those. The new fancy treadmill that is also not right now being covered under the health care plans. And she would charge that same $25 fee for that other non-covered tool, okay? So treating it as a barn fee is a little bit dicey. That being said, there are other payer sources that might, that fall maybe in a different area in the therapy realm, say early intervention, for example, where if you were doing early intervention, the families might be expected to pay the gym fee at the child gym that they're going to, where the therapist is working with the child in the community. So you could possibly do sort of a facility fee. I would shy away from words like barn fee and horse fee and that kind of thing, just because, again, I think that just lends, I think it keeps it confusing. Now, none of that would work for me in New Mexico, because we're like the 48th or 49th poorest state. The irony is 72% of our pediatric population is on Medicaid. And so our families wouldn't be able to afford to pay for a specialty tool. But because we're a poor state, if our Medicaid wasn't really paying well, those kids wouldn't get any therapy services. So our therapy reimbursement actually more, very adequately reimburses us for including equine movement as a tool based on doing a certain amount of therapy a week. That help?
Yes,
Okay.
so your clients that are Medicaid are on income-based Medicaid, not like in Colorado where it's severity and disability-based.
Well, when it gets to be severity and disability based, isn't that the waiver? That's the waiver though. So yeah, this would be primary Medicaid. I don't do waiver patients. So this would be primary Medicaid, yes.
Same insurance, it's the exact same as some.
Is it? Okay, all right. Yeah, so I guess, so you also have to look at your state by state situations. But whatever you do, you need to make it very consistent and be cautious in your wording.
In Colorado is income-based. If you're talking about disability, that is the waiver program, that's where they're sourcing us to use the F.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Now, you cannot bill straight Medicaid if you include equine movement in your therapy. That's what we've been working on for the last year and a half to get
Right,
excluded.
so can we integrate this non-covered?
Yes.
When that exclusion gets removed and we can bill straight Medicaid, then yes, we can do that. Does that make sense?
I guess I'm still questioning.
Okay, well, because,
We should not
Yeah.
be billing the waiver at all, period.
No, but can we bill the parents a fee?
if they're Medicaid patients, you can't bill the parents anyway. It's irrelevant.
But people are saying that it's not a Medicaid covered benefit.
Well, Cassie?
Yeah, it's important to ask your local Medicaid.
Yeah.
We have Medi-Cal, which, California has to be different than everything. But, as long as I do provide that to my Medi-Cal patients, there's a paper that says I would like to
Okay,
use
okay,
this
I'll say
tool,
that.
or I
Okay,
will-
thank
or
you.
Otherwise, we'll carry on your treatment plan without that tool. I can't still bill my Medi-Cal
The
patients.
barn fee? Is the equipment. Yeah, non-covered, something, yeah.
Yes,
We have a Colorado task force that meets monthly and works on this, so I suggest you fill out and give them your email and make sure they send you.
Yeah. What's happening, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Mary Helene brought up something really important. If you're treating adults, you can't call it a facility fee because Medicare won't pay for it. In other words, Cassie's verbiage is the most correct. That it,
From any location
yeah,
at all, because you pay rent for your building, so I'm charging them a location fee for that.
right,
So it's different from a tool,
a tool,
especially tool.
right, yeah, yes.
So, I know we're not trying to separate a separate service. However, in my website, I specialize in certified lactation counseling and hippotherapy. So,
As a tool,
yes, but those are my specialties.
okay,
Okay, so I have a separate page, I have my normal about page, has all of the things that I do, and a brief description of those, but I have a page that's dedicated to what is certified lactation counseling, what is hippotherapy, and that I feel like would separate it.
so let me ask you, all right, so let me ask you back though. So you specialize in hippotherapy as a tool, but is 100% of what you do with your clientele on the horse? With the horse? Okay, so you're still providing your therapy services. It would just, it's not, I think it's more about, first of all, the tagline should be there. And I myself, I don't even use the word hippotherapy. I specialize in equine movement as a treatment tool because hippotherapy's gotten so confusing. But whatever you're doing, you need to be sure that, there's a lot of people that just look at pictures and they don't even read. And so you don't want to leave the impression that all you're doing is patients and horses. So, and then I would probably say, I specialize in this tool, and I would describe it. But then I would actually, from a marketing standpoint, maybe have, the picture of the client in, using hippotherapy and that same client doing something else or whatever. Right, right, okay.
But I feel like there's so much, like I do want to educate people
Right.
about what is hippotherapy.
Right.
So, but I don't want to put that, there's so much to say that I don't want to put that in my just regular about, because it's one part.
Yes.
So if I have a separate page
Yeah.
for the certified lactation counseling and all of that is entailed, it's okay to have a separate page for.
I think so, because what you're doing, as long as the terminology is accurate and it's not saying hippotherapy or hippotherapy, I think hippotherapy as a standalone word is dangerous. I think you need to describe it correctly, and it's a tool that's used in conjunction with the other tools and activities that I use. And just those little things help to start shaping the public perception. And I think that's what we're really trying to do, is shape public perception, which includes the health insurance companies. Huh? And you lead with the therapy.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, yeah, right, right.
Clinic, but these
Yeah.
are the things that I specialize in.
Sure.
So we have time in the clinic, we have time on
Yeah.
course, and I also have this other specialty that is certified lactation counseling. Obviously, I don't put the babies on course. So that is a separate kind of thing, but I didn't know if that would
Yeah.
contribute to that.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more. Yes.
I have a question related to Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Yeah. It's okay, go for it.
So billing with your treatment procedural codes, but we're using equine movement as a treatment tool. Is it, if they have some exclusion, then is that?
So that's a very good question. And I'm not going to stand up here and say, ignore the exclusions, because I would be setting you up for failure. So let me just, and yet I have to be honest, I am a network provider for Blue Cross Blue Shield. And it's really ironic because they are also one of the MCOs that govern Medicaid in our state. And our Medicaid actually set, in their contracts with Blue Cross Blue Shield, they have to cover hippotherapy as a treatment tool. And yet their commercial plans have this exclusion. So it's really, really crazy. So here's my advice. If you feel that your documentation and your services really represent what you do as a therapy professional accurately, and somebody comes back at you and tries to say, oh no, you were doing hippotherapy and that's an exclusion, if you feel comfortable, you need to feel comfortable defending it. Okay, you know what? They don't want to tangle with me because I'm going to win. No, I'm going to win because they're the ones that have misrepresented it, not me. But I also, I've heard all the arguments. I'm going to be very proactive, and I get lots of audits, and I've never had anybody walk in the door that didn't understand that it was just one of the things that we did. And our clinical documentation is very, very balanced. So probably 90% of the time, we don't even refer to equine movement if it was used. It might be the case that it was something really dramatic happened because we do need to refer to it, but it's understanding who's reading the documentation. And so if I say I used equine movement to promote postural control for speech sound production, the person reading it would have to understand why equine movement would do that. I don't feel like that's standard therapy language. But if I say I used a period of measured dynamic movement activity to facilitate, postural control for speech production, I don't really care in their mind's eye if they see the kid on a horse or on a ball or on a swing. That doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. The tool is irrelevant. What I do want them to see is that before I used that dynamic movement, he had 0.5 seconds sustained phonation, and 20 minutes later, he had 2.5 seconds sustained phonation. That's what the message is. And so I very much use standard therapy language, because there's other tools. I've used this example before. If I said I used prompt to promote production of these target speech sounds, how many of you would even know what I was talking about? Anybody? Yeah, only the speech pathologist would know, okay? All right, but if I said I used a tactile kinesthetic cueing system to promote those speech sounds, does that resonate a little bit better? You kind of have an idea that I did something that made it happen? Okay, same thing. So I do not feel a bit bad about not telling them all that I'm using a horse, but I am ready if they come and they want to know about it, I can educate them, yeah.
Is it in the plan of care?
It's very interesting. That question comes up a lot because in our plans of care, we don't actually write down what we're going to do. We actually do a lot of work on establishing the diagnostic criteria and the treatment plan and the goals, but it's just the nature of documentation in New Mexico. We don't have to say, and we're going to use this and this and this and this and this and this and this. But if I did, I would probably phrase it a variety of activities including, and I might put dynamic movement activities, and then in parentheses, a mini tramp, a ball, equine movement. I probably wouldn't say the word hippotherapy because it's a buzzword. Yeah. So that's up to you. That's up to you. And that is full disclosure to do that. So that's fine. Okay.
Would there be a possibility for us to get emailed like a really good example of a plan of care from each discipline?
From who?
From somebody that you guys would approve of. Like you guys get together and create one, even a fake one, so that we can have.
Your committee could look at creating some resources maybe on that. I don't know.
Some type
Yeah.
of good template.
Okay.
Would be helpful.
Okay.
For us to know what it should look
I'll take that to the committee. I don't want to do that. No, I mean, I could go right to my EMR and do that, but I got to think about that a little bit. Okay. Thank you. I know that it's a very, this is like the big hurdle in using all of this. And I just want people to know that you have to treat it like a business and you have to be very mindful of every aspect of it. Okay? All right. Good job. Thank you. Okay.